Today I want to talk about the concept of the women's mitzvah in Chanukah. If you look at source number 1, the Mishnah in Masechet Kedushin teaches us Kol mitzvah aseh shazman grama anashim chayavim v'nashim peturot. It's a general rule we have in halacha that when you have a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment that's zman grama, traditionally that's usually translated as time-bound, but I'm going to call it time-related. When you have a mitzvah aseh, positive mitzvah that's time-related, usually we say women are patur from this. So, just as simple examples, on Sukkot, if a woman is patur from sitting in a sukkah. Why? Because we obviously don't have a mitzvah to sit in a sukkah today, therefore it's a time-related mitzvah. The mitzvah only comes at a certain time of the year. So any mitzvah that's time-related like that, sitting in a sukkah, listening to shofar, shaking the lulav, those are the easy ones to think of. In general, we say women are patur. So I have a question here. Sorry, I'm a teacher, so I might have to make you participate a little. What about Hanukkah candles? Would you define it, first of all, is it a mitzvah aseh? Aseh or lo taseh? First of all, we say it's an aseh, right? It's an action we're doing. And is it zman grama? Is it time related? Yeah, obviously. Tonight I don't have a mitzvah to light Hanukkah candles. As soon as Hanukkah starts, though, the mitzvah starts. So are women obligated or not? Here's our big question. So if you look at source number 2, I have three different Gemaras, one line from each Gemara. They're very similar, but they're talking about different holidays. So I'm just going to read each of them and we'll get to Chanukah. 2 Aleph is from Masechet Megillah. Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Nashim chayavot b'mikra Megillah, she'af hein hayu be'oto anis. When you talk about Megillah also would fall into this category of a mitzvah aseh shazman grama, right? We only have that mitzvah on Purim. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi tells us that women are obligated. Why? It says, af hein hayu be'oto anis. What does that mean, af hein hayu be'oto anis? For right now, well, that's obviously the shir, so we're going to delve into it more, but for now we're just going to translate it. They too were involved in the miracle. The second mitzvah in Bet, it says, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, our friend shows up again, Nashim chayavot be'arba kosod halalu, she'af hein hayu be'oto anis. It's a different mitzvah. On Pesach night, we have a mitzvah to drink 4 cups of wine. And normally, you could think, very similarly to Purim, that women would not be obligated, because again, it's obviously time-bound. We don't have that mitzvah in July. We don't have that mitzvah today. We only have that mitzvah 1 or here 2 nights of the year. And therefore, you would think that women aren't obligated. But as Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi tells us, because again, we were involved in that nace as well. And now bring us back to Chanukah and Gimel. Isha vadai madlika. A woman should definitely light candles. Obviously, we're talking about Chanukah candles. De Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Nashim chayavot b'ner Chanukah sha'af hein hayu be'oto anis. Because women are chayav in lighting Chanukah candles because, again, they too were involved in this nace. So what does that exactly mean, they too were involved in this nace? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi keeps saying it, and he reminds us of different times they were involved in this nace. But what does it really mean? So I'm going to switch things up a little. We're going to skip source 3 and go to source 4. I sometimes do this to my students. I tell them it's to keep them on their toes. I just really changed my mind after I printed the sources. But let's look at source number 4, which is Tosfot. Tosfot explains, She'af hein hayu be'oto anis. I'm going to skip to the end of the second line. She'af hein mashma she'en tiplu pirsho haya lo lamar she'en lechach nira li she'af hein hayu besafek de lahashmid ulaharuk. V'ken b'pesach she'ayu mishubat leparo b'mitzrayim v'ken b'chanukah hagazir haya me'ad alehan. What happened? We were also at risk. The women were also at risk for being destroyed. Al-Hashmi, he says destroyed, right? We were at risk by all the decrees that were going on at that time. So we could think about this very obviously. If we think about Pesach, the women were obviously slaves in Mitzrayim. The women were under all of Paro's decree. So obviously we were saved by those miracles. So af hein hayu be'oto anis is they too were saved by this miracle. If you look at Purim, again, we know what happened. Haman didn't care if you were a man or a woman. If you were a Jew, Haman wanted to kill you, much like other times in Jewish history, right? That was Haman's objective. And now Chanukah, again, also, what does that mean? We know that Antiochus had many decrees against the Jewish people. And again, they weren't specific to men or women. It was against everybody. And all those mitzvot, each of those decrees that Antiochus had against against the Jewish people were ones that were foundational mitzvot, were ones that were he was trying to destroy our relationship with Torah. He was trying to destroy our relationship with God. So, for example, he knocked out the mitzvah. He said, no more Rosh Chodesh. If you can't commemorate Rosh Chodesh, if you can't figure out when Rosh Chodesh is, you can't figure out when every other holiday of the year is, right? He said, no more Bris Milah. We know that Bris Milah is obviously one of the foundational mitzvot. That's our brit with Hashem, right? That's what describes our connection to Hashem. But specifically, he even had one that was for the women. And if you look in source number 5, Rashi tells us, oh, sorry, is it? Yeah. So 5. When he tells us, I'm sorry, 1 second. The Rashi tells, number 5, sorry. There was a gezerah that any single time, any woman that was about to get married, any Jewish woman that was about to get married, before they were supposed to get married, they needed to go to a Greek soldier who was to take them into their home first and basically rape them, right? So what was this decree about? This decree was, what was he trying to knock out there? He was trying to knock out the foundation of the home, the foundation of Shalom Bayis, right? We're supposed to start our home together in a pure state, and if each bride goes to a Greek soldier before they get married, that kind of knocks out the sanctity of the home, right? He did anything he could to knock out any piece of shalom, any foundation of the home, and by extension, the foundation of the home, when you're building a Torah home, that also represents our relationship with Hashem. So clearly, when we talk about Afhin Hayu Be'oto Anes, according to Tosfot, we talk about how we were saved from the miracle. It's pretty obvious that we were saved from this miracle, and if it weren't for that miracle, we would also have been in a very bad state. So if we look at this mitzvah, if we look at Shafin Hayuto Hanes from the perspective of Tosfot, it's very clear it's a mitzvah. It's almost like a mitzvah of Hakarat Hatov, right? God saved us, so how are we going to say thank you? Every single year, we're going to participate in this mitzvah. We are very much included in the saving, and therefore we need to make sure that we're very much involved in the participation of the mitzvah. And again, it goes through with all 3 holidays. We want to say thank you to Hashem. Hakarat Hatov is a very important thing that we don't always necessarily pay attention to. But especially when we're talking about our relationship with Hashem, we want to thank Him for everything He's done for us. So when we light our Chanukah candles and we remember all the terrible decrees of Antiochus, we want to remember that we were actually saved as well. And every single person was involved. On the flip side, there's a different translation to Afhin Hayu Be'oto Anes. And Rashi, if you look at Rashbam, source number 3, Rashbam talks about it translates it a little bit differently. She'afhin Hayu Be'oto Anes, Damar b'Masechet Sota, B'schar Nashim Tzadkaniot, She'ayu Be'oto Ador, Nigalu v'ken gabe Mikrei Megillah, Amar Hachi Mishum De'al Yidei Esther, Have v'ken gabe Chanukah b'Masechet Shabbat. He explains, as opposed to Tosfot that explains She'afhin Hayu Be'oto Anes, is that even we were saved by this miracle. He explains that Afhin Hayu Be'oto Anes is even they were the ones who caused the miracle. So what does that mean? Let's look again at the different holidays. Let's take Purim first, because that's the most obvious. Who saved us? Esther saved the day. We even named the Megillah after her, right? That's a very obvious one. Therefore, Esther saved us, so it makes sense. We're all going to make sure to go out and hear Megillah. What about Pesach? Well, I hear of different people, but yeah. Okay, Shifra and Puah took a very strong role. I'm going to take also a little bit differently. The Midrash tells us what happened after Paro's decree. Paro said all baby boys should be thrown into the river and should be killed. And initially, the response of the Jewish people was to get divorced. Everybody divorced their wives because they said, why should we have more children so that Paro can kill them? it kind of emotionally makes a lot of sense. Why would I want to have a baby that just Paro's going to murder immediately? But the Midrash tells us that Miriam, as a little girl, went to her father and said to her father, "You're worse than Paro. Paro just decreed on the boys. You're decreeing on the girls as well." And that's what the pasuk tells us at that point, that Yocheved and Amram got remarried at that point, and later on we know that they had Moshe as a result of that. But the Midrash tells us that all the couples remarried and they continued to have children. And the Midrash talks about that the Zchut Nashim Tzadkaniot, the righteous women that were willing to get remarried, to make sure to be with their husbands, to make sure to have more children, even though they knew they were at risk for watching their children being murdered immediately after, because they were able to continue the Jewish people. Right? Had they continued on the path of just separating, we know what would have happened. That would have been the end of Bnei Israel, and that would have been the end of the whole story. Paro would have run out of slaves, but we also would have never made it out. So because of these Nashim Tzadkaniot who are willing to do that, who are willing to have children who are going to be killed, who ultimately we know we got Moshe from there, and ultimately we were able to leave a strong nation, it's because of those Nashim Tzadkaniot that we were that we want to celebrate on Pesach as well, right? Women save the day. We're gonna participate that as well. So what about Chanukah? Anyone know? Yehudi, good. So I'm gonna recap the story a little bit. So the interesting thing about Yehudi, we don't have. It's not like Megillat Esther, where we have it all recorded, and obviously Yetziat Mitzrayim comes from the Torah, so we have midrashim that are recorded. The story of Yehudi shows up in different places and different historical documents, but it's different everywhere. So if you've heard it a little bit differently than the way I'm going to explain, it's not crazy, because there are some discrepancies in the story. But basically, Yehudi she was the daughter of Yochanan the Kohen Gadol, and she was a young widow. She lived in Betul, which was under siege. And things were very, very bad at that point, as you can imagine, and they were running out of food. And the people went to Uzziah, the leader of the community, and said, "We got to surrender. This is we can't do this anymore." And Uzziah said, "Let's give it 5 more days," or I think it was a week, whatever. "Let's give it a little more time, and if assuming that something doesn't happen by then we'll surrender." And Yehudit went up to him afterwards and said, "With all due respect, I think you're making a grave mistake. If we believe in Hashem, we know He's going to protect us, and we need to hold on to our emunah. And at the same time, surrendering, we know, is so much worse than dying of starvation, because we know what the Yavanim will do to us otherwise." So Yehudit, who is known to be very charismatic, very lovable, very bold, she was known for her tzedakah and her chesed, said to Uzziah, "Let me try something." And obviously Uzziah was very skeptical about letting her try something. It was in the middle of war, but he said he would let her try. So Yehudit went out. She went out to the camp, and she went to the general, and she said, "I have an idea for you." And she kind of became close, so to speak, with the general. She made herself known to him, and she said, "I want to help you. Right now, it's true. In Betul, they're falling apart. They don't have food, but they do have one thing. They still have God's protection. But in a few days, in a little bit more, they're going to run out of food, and then they're going to get so hungry, they're going to start eating non-kosher food. And once they start forsaking the mitzvot, so then they'll lose God's protection. So let me be your spy, and I'll tell you when they run out of kosher food." And the general loved this idea, because obviously now he had an inside spy, and he said, "Okay, fine, go for it." And in the meantime, Yehudit became known in the camp of the soldiers. She got her own tent. She was allowed to walk freely amongst the soldiers. Nobody said anything to her. Nobody stopped her. Nobody anything. The king started to get impatient, so finally she said to him, he asked what's going on. She said to him, "Okay, they ran out of kosher food. Give it 3 days, and I'm sure by then you can attack them." So the general was ecstatic by this idea and said, "Okay, we have to have a feast tonight." So at this feast, Yehudit sat with the general, and she gave him lots of cheese and lots of wine, until eventually, we know what happens when you drink lots of wine, he passed out. And when she was sure that he was very asleep, she, inspired by the story of Yael and Shoftim, took a knife, chopped his head off. Sorry to be gruesome, but that's the story. He chopped his head off, hid it, and ran out straight back to the Tul, to Uzziah, to present the head. So just as a side, first of all, number one, if anyone was wondering where the minhag to eat cheese on Chanukah came from, just like Uzziah, we like to eat, and just like Yehudit, we like to eat cheese on Chanukah. But also, so that's one thing. So she took the head, and what happened? They attacked. The Jews were able to surprise attack, and the Greeks ran away, and she saved the day. So it was basically, and also in addition to this, what do we do on Chanukah? For the first half hour after we light candles, the Mishnah Berurah says that women shouldn't do any malacha. It's kind of like the, Hakarat HaTov on the flip side, right? Before we talked about we're saying Hakarat HaTov to God, now we're saying Hakarat HaTov to the women. For the women, for the half hour, because you saved the day, we're going to let you sit for a half hour and not do anything. And then the next half hour you have more work. But, no, I'm joking. Mishnah Berurah. If anyone wants to, it's the Mishnah Berurah. It's not made up. So we want to, why? Because we want to celebrate the fact, again, that Yehudit had, she was heroic enough to go and do this. This was not exactly something that was very simple to do. It was definitely outside of her comfort zone. But she was comfortable enough to do that. And that's why, when we talk about Afhin Hayu Be'oto Hanes, when we talk about the fact that we are, in fact, women are obligated, unlike other mitzvot, Aseh Shazman Grama, we are obligated to make sure that we do this mitzvah. We want to remember the fact that Yehudit was the one that saved the day. She went out of her comfort zone. She did something heroic. She went above and beyond because she knew that's what had to be done. So sometimes when it comes to something as big as saving the Jewish people, you can't. It's very easy to say, like, how could I do something, or what am I going to do? But she stepped up to the plate and she said, this is what needs to happen, and I'm going to do it. And that's something we want to remember on Chanukah. And that's why even the women, again, Afhin Hayu Be'oto Hanes, we're going to sit and we want to make sure to celebrate this mitzvah and remember that we too can make a big difference. Sometimes even with our little actions, but we can make a difference in this story. If you look, I just tie it together. I brought the brachot that we make on Chanukah. So the first bracha, if you look, it's pretty standard fare bracha. It's the bracha that we make on. It's a bracha we make basically every mitzvah. We say Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, but just that's pretty much the formula. All bracha, we say, we thank Hashem for commanding us to do this specific mitzvah, and all this mitzvah, we say lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, Netilat Lulav, right throughout the whole year. And just to skip the third bracha, again, is pretty standard. Every single time we reach a new period of the year, right? Whenever we get to something new in our lives, we make sure to say right? It's not a given that you're going to make it from holiday to holiday. And every single time we reach that new season, we want to make sure to thank Hashem that He brought us to this point, and that we are able to be doing His mitzvah. It's a very exciting bracha. It's a very exciting concept. Like, we've made it to Chanukah again, and we're going to make it again when we get to Purim, and we'll make it again, or I guess before that, Tu B'Shvat on new fruits. But we make it very often to say thank you to Hashem for getting us to the next point. The second bracha, though, is a little bit different than what we normally say. And it's actually a bracha that we only make twice a year. On Purim, when we read the Megillah, and on Chanukah, when we light the candles. And just coincidentally, or I don't know if coincidentally, but just as a side point, the only time we have a similar bracha is before Daled Kosot. We actually say Asher Ge'alanu, which has very similar themes. It's not the exact same bracha, but it's the only time we have a bracha like that. So it makes sense, when you're talking about Afhin Hayu Be'oto Hanes, there's a lot of things in common between these three miracles. But the middle bracha, when we say, is when we're saying Sha'asa Nisim La'avotenu, that you've done miracles for our fathers, B'yamim ha'em b'zman hazeh, in the days of our fathers and in the days of now. So what are we saying exactly? So Rav Taragin writes that this is a bracha that we make whenever we're talking about a mitzvah of Persumei Nisa. Right? And again, when we talk about Chanukah, we know Persumei Nisa is so important. We make sure to light in a place that everyone can see the candles. Why do we want to do that? Why do we want to light in a place that everyone can see the candles? Sorry. back in teacher room. We want to light in a place that everyone can see the candles because we want to publicize this miracle and all those aspects that we've already talked about. We want to bring that light into the world, and we want to say, just in terms of if we're talking about the Hakaras HaTov, we want to point out to everybody, look what God does for the Jewish people, and look how God has saved us, right? We want to make sure that everyone knows what's going on, and that's why Persumei Nisa is so important. And in Purim, there's an aspect of Persumei Nisa as well, which is why we find it very, very important that Megillah is read together, meaning as best as you can. Obviously, there's extenuating circumstances, but as best as you can, the Mishnah Berurah actually recommends that even if you normally daven in a smaller shul, but there's a larger shul nearby, the smaller shul should go with the larger shul, because we want to be doing it with as many people as possible. Why? Because Persumei Nisa, we want everybody to know this is how Hashem has saved us. This is what God does for us, and this is how God helps us. So when we're talking about, so we always talk about this with Persumei Nisa, because the goal is that we want everyone to know what Hashem has done for us, and we want to remind ourselves as well. You know, sometimes it's a little bit hard to feel Hashem in our present lives, but when we're talking about some of the miracles of Chanukah and Purim some are a little bit obvious, right? A miracle of oil lasting 8 days, that's definitely a nes nigla. That's above what nature happens. But some of the miracles, when you talk about Purim, when you talk about the fact that we won the war, you want to look at current events sometimes also. You know, I mean, I don't know if I could say this, but when you look at some of the things that happened over the summer, you could look at it and you could say it happens to be, it's coincidence, or you could recognize what the nace is, and you could recognize the fact that that coincidence wouldn't have happened if Hashem wasn't heavily involved. So when we talk, that's what we want to be. Persumei Nisa, we want to be showing the entire world. We want to thank Hashem for the little ones, the ones that He's involved in our life, even when it's not such an obvious nace. And that's why we want to do it with Chanukah as well. And that's why we say the bracha of, when we make sure to say, Sha'as hanisim la'avotina bayamim hahem bazman hazeh, right? Hashem performs miracles for us on a daily basis, and even if they're not so obvious, and He performed miracles for us throughout Jewish history, and we want to thank Hashem and show the entire world. So these are just some of the ideas just to keep in mind when we're lighting candles. Again, first of all, when you're actually lighting candles, because now we know that we're all obligated to. But besides that, we want to make sure that we remember it's not just about lighting the candles. It's about remembering all those concepts behind the miracles themselves and what Hashem has actually done for us. Freilich and Chanukah, thank you for coming. Oh, yeah, sure.
First of all, thank you very much. Very interesting. Very nice. Thank you. Regarding the brachot, we never light only one candle, ever, but our brachot is always l'havli there in the singular. Why is that?
So I think you're right, we never light one candle. The first night, though, meaning we light one candle in the shamash, right? So the shamash is not really part of the mitzvah itself. The shamash, it's a helper, literally, and for various reasons. I think we say l'hadlik ner because the base mitzvah, it's another Gemara in Shabbos, the base mitzvah is actually just to light one candle. We developed as a hidur mitzvah, so to speak, we developed a different way, and we light very differently than just one candle. But the mitzvah itself is lahalik ner, and so I guess you're making that bracha on the one ner that's the mitzvah for itself.